This episode is sponsored by Arc IT, and you'll find out more about them later on in the episode.
I think what I try to do when we're talking about kind of the future here is it's like, well, we both know, and everyone kind of knows, we're behind, right? Like, we're behind everyone else when it comes to software and technology. So what historical type of, and you mentioned this with the YouTube thing, which is great, like YouTube and GoPro and the platforms there. And I was kind of like, we're in 1994, right? And I think you can kind of like, history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. And I think we're just kind of like in this earlier epoch because it's just harder to move atoms right now, right? Like, bits are really fun and easy to move around. And this is the hard part, right? This is the where it's like marshaling atoms. And it's just gonna be harder. But like, I think you can see some parallels there. Like, biotech is having a very similar moment where things are starting to get to a point where you can start just to code genomes. So, some of these harder industries where it's working with biology or it's working with like bricks and mortar, it wasn't going to happen as quickly as bits, but it will get there. And I think we'll have a very kind of interestingly rhyming history.
Hi there, I'm Evan Troxel. Welcome to my podcast about how technology is changing the architectural profession. Welcome back to the podcast. In this episode, I welcome Ian Janicki of Outfit, and it was a pleasure speaking with Ian. He actually has an interesting background. He's a second-generation architect. He worked in the trades as a teen, and I think both of these things revealed to him what he wanted out of the profession and also what he didn't want out of the profession, and it gave him a very unique perspective that totally makes sense when you see where he's gone with it. He did his 5-year charade, and that's a direct quote from Ian in the episode, at Cornell, and pretty much went straight into tech after graduation. He's the founder of Outfit, and we get into why his startup exists in the episode. I decided to call this episode The Moment, so I want to give a quick explanation about what that is. The Moment serves as a backdrop to kick off a conversation about what we're seeing happening in AEC Tech. And the moniker is in reference to the unforeseen convergence of several tech companies in the mid-1990s that brought so-called extreme sports into the mainstream. I talk about why I picked this example in the episode. We then use this as a framework to examine some startups that are currently working in the AEC technology space. And I'm hoping that they're working together with one another rather than independent silos, converging towards a moment for AEC. I love this quote from Steve Jobs that he said in his 2005 Stanford commencement address. You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. It's worth watching if you haven't seen it. I'll have a link to it in the show notes. And so in this episode, we explore the topics of platforms and apps, puzzles and puzzle pieces, infrastructure and APIs, some speculation about what's changing, and perhaps more importantly, what's not changing in the next 10 years in AEC, the choice companies make to work on hard projects versus latching onto shiny objects, moving bits versus marshaling atoms, which is the first time I'd heard that, and Ian, I think, coined that term, and so much more. So without further ado, I bring you my conversation with Ian Janicki. Ian, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you.
Evan, thank you so much for having me.
There's this thing going on. I have this idea about the moment. And the moment, I was explaining that I like to do mountain biking, I like to do rock climbing. And so there's like kind of this extreme sports aspect to me, which I don't consider any of it extreme, but that's just kind of the label that I think was, ESPN helped make a part of everybody's vocabulary, right, with the X Games. But it seems to have become this overnight sensation, and then start to think about the pieces that were in place to make that. And that's what the moment to me is. And so when I think about the core ingredients of how that happened, how not now when you go to the rock climbing gym, it's packed. It's packed full of people. Like, that was never a thing, right? It was always team sports when I was a kid. Did you play any sports or anything when you were growing up?
Of course.
Yeah, so I was never a team sports player. I was like a skater, and I was a rock climber and a BMXer, and it wasn't my thing. And there was always like a really small group of kids doing what I was doing. Not a big. It wasn't like there was no trophies for skateboarding, right? It wasn't that kind of thing. But thinking about how tech kind of enabled this quote unquote overnight sensation, thinking about the pieces that came together. And the analogy is that that's happening again in the architectural, the AEC space. Let's talk about the ingredients of extreme sports. And then I thought it would be fun for us to try to kind of connect the dots of what's going on now, you guys being a part of that, and then maybe pontificate on what the future could be. But Google bought YouTube, brought it out of the Wild West. YouTube before that didn't have as much foundation to it as Google brought, data centers and security and all those things. Facebook became available to anybody with an email address, so the ability for people to share stuff at scale. And then cable modems came out, which allowed HD video streaming. Bandwidth was a big deal. That's a key component to this equation. This one, I think, is a little bit less well known, but I think looking back, it's pretty obvious. Is this small startup camera company in San Diego started producing GoPros and a wearable camera, which is a big deal. I mean, I grew up in the day of mini DV making, and before that it was like these giant camcorders that sat on your shoulder. And X Games was all TV production, giant cameras on giant tripods. And now you could wear these things and shoot, a burst of video. And all of these things converged to enable kind of this explosion of a very personal expression on the rock or, underwater or on a bike going down a trail in the backwoods where nobody else was around. And so that to me was kind of an interesting, like a whole recipe put together. And now what people are able to do with a production studio in your pocket. And that's where it's come from there. So let's pontificate on the outfits of the world, the Hypars of the world, the test fits of the world, the Kanoas, there's a lot of them.
I think what you're getting at is, and especially with the example of, say, GoPro or YouTube, it's really about platforms. It's about these kind of horizontal plays that really reduce the kind of capital costs of being able to, produce like a really high-end YouTube video or something like that. But I think in terms of, if we want to use the analogy of where we are in the AEC space and comparing it to the rest of software, I would even say we're probably more to earlier moment. We're probably like in 1994, right? We're kind of like just at the dawn of the internet, because what was everything pre-internet? Everything was in isolation, and architects still work in isolation. There's no open source repositories. And I know there's a lot of companies trying to bring shared resources to the forefront, but for the vast majority of firms out there, it is pretty isolated. Mm-hmm. Everything is built in-house. Back in the 90s, software companies were still racking servers, and it took several years for AWS and this idea of really commoditizing these components that really don't make the individual company more successful. Like being really good at racking servers doesn't make you greater margin. It doesn't make you grow. It's just kind of like it's just a necessary checklist. And what platforms allow you to do is allow you to focus on what are you specifically trying to serve your customers with, and all these other things are really distractions. What I think is so interesting about this moment is all these platforms starting to come online, and whether it be upcodes and really allowing us to see every single zoning ordinance or around the country, or whether it be Hypar and what they're trying to do in terms of kind of creating the AEC EC2 instance, as you were. Mm-hmm. And that basically allows, if we think about those as platforms, then what we're really starting to see on top of them, and at the very, very early days, are these applications, right? So you have this platform layer, and then you have the application layer. And I see Outfit as one of those applications. And just to kind of give a primer about Outfit, for those who don't know, we make Outfit makes do-it-yourself projects as easy as possible. So customers come to our website, they choose their style and budget, and we deliver a kit of materials, tools, and instructions right to their front door. And so, we saw that the best solution today was watching YouTube videos and asking for help at the Home Depot. But what people really want is the pain-free architect quality renovation at an affordable price. Mm-hmm. And, let's think about those platforms we need to sit on top of. Well, I think one of the interesting ones is just kind of how much e-commerce has advanced in the last 10 years. Before, I wasn't able to know what sort of inventory of 2x4s are in a specific zip code, but now I have access to the information. And while there isn't necessarily an app layer or platform layer for that particular yet, like we're still building some of that stuff in house. I wish there was a platform layer that was like a pure API where I could, say I need 3 sheets of gypsum at this address in 3 hours. Like, unfortunately, that doesn't exist yet.
Right.
Someone listening wants to build that, I will be your first angel check. But, I think that's what's so exciting about right now. What's necessary for these platforms to exist are enough application layer users, right? Like, right. If you're building these platforms and 3 people use it, well, then it's not worth the work, right? And so I think what's so exciting is that as we start to have companies like ours or any of the other renovation companies or really anyone trying to build something at scale across the nation, serving many different customers in many different locales and many different use cases, these platforms become more and more important because I don't want to build some sort of extremely complex internal application that it really doesn't differentiate us from one company to the next. I want to focus on my customers' really specific needs. And I think, as more of us come online, there will be more demand for these platform layer pieces. I think that's what's really just very exciting about this moment.
Yeah, I'm wondering, are the platforms taking enough interest in the app makers like yourself? Because obviously there's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario going on here where you've got to build the platform to attract the people, not knowing what the people who build the apps are actually going to make, right? Because it's just pure potential at that point. Obviously, they can tweak and bend the platform to enable you to do your amazing idea and everybody else's as well. And then in return, all of those apps then make the platform more attractive as well. It definitely is this kind of back and forth. I don't want to call it a tug of war, but it's like a very much like a collaborative effort. And so I'm wondering, do the platform makers themselves, obviously it takes a ton of effort and energy to build the platform. Are they also reaching out and building the bridges between you to enable you to succeed on their platforms?
At the end of the day, it's really about existing demand. And I think that there have to be more of us to come online to really start to show that there is demand there. But like, think about the chicken and egg, and that's been kind of the story of platforms and apps forever, right? I mean, you could say that, there wasn't a market for, S3 or whatever I forget what the first AWS product was on the market. It's like, there's no market for this. It's like, well, they invented it because there's latent demand because people were racking servers, yeah. And then, someone came along and said, actually, just press a button and we'll take care of it for you. Yeah. And, we're now going to just be hyper-focused on that thing versus you having to kind of spend maybe, getting a couple hours in on working on security when security is really, really important. But now because it's getting pushed to the platform layer, they can actually become the world experts at it. So you don't have to be the world expert at it, right? It's kind of like obviously that type of responsibility away. And it's really about kind of latent demand there. And so, I mean, as these apps come online, right, they're going to be kind of taking, either expanding an existing market or taking an existing market from kind of traditional players and building those applications. And, I think that there's a lot of hungry entrepreneurs out there who can span the gap between architecture, engineering, construction, and technology, and can fill those gaps. And, while they haven't necessarily, raised their, round or anything like that, you can see on these these great communities out there, like Architecty and, just even AEC Twitter, that these people they're building things and it may not show up today, but it's the time to jump into this is now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I love the analogy of the app idea because it is like everybody's a piece of the puzzle and they get to focus on being their piece of the puzzle and how they're going to interface with kind of the directly adjacent puzzle pieces. But overall, the puzzle builder who decides what the whole, that really is more, maybe it's not one platform, but it's several platforms interfacing with each other to kind of define the edges. And then how it fills in the middle, they really have no idea. And they don't know who's going to becoming knocking on the door with an idea to build a specific piece of the puzzle. And I love that idea of you guys being able to just focus solely on the thing that you're so good at and not have to worry about this other stuff because somebody else hopefully is interested in that or taking care of that.
Well, I think if you speak to any platform builder, whether it be in any industry, but especially software, you speak to the founders and you ask them, are the applications being built on top of your system? Are they what you imagined when you were building the platform? And we'll say, absolutely not.
Right.
But but it was so exciting and so energizing to see all the amazing things that people come up with, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need to provide that infrastructure, and then people will make amazing things on top of it.
So getting back to this kind of idea about the moment, if this is the moment, what are you excited about that's going on right now? I know that, like you said, there's AEC Twitter, which I've got a list on Twitter, and lots of people follow it because I just try to categorize people into this. And I think it is one of the best places to have these conversations. It's just where the community is. And you mentioned Architecty, the Slack channel as well. I feel like Twitter is there's a lot more volume going through there. And so who are the people that you're talking to who are other puzzle pieces of this moment in this evolution of architectural profession, the building industry?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so, it's a small community right now. And so I only have a small list of folks to kind of pontificate about right now. But, what I think is really exciting about, what the Hypart team is doing and, how they're basically turning functions into this kind of cloud layer. I think that's extremely exciting. Testbit.io is really another excellent example of this, where it's taking data from parcels and being able to come up with test bits of these different structures that would take potentially months and months of times for a developer and an architect to collaborate and come up with. And I think what's so exciting here is not necessarily these in isolation, but when people start to stack these things, right? And so I can see in a couple of years where someone combines, say the Reonomy API, and Reonomy is kind of this service which allows you to kind of search for different plots, right, and see who the owner is. And so maybe you could cross that with some sort of hyper function or a testbit.io type of function, and then you could tap into some other, I don't know this space as well, but some sort of like capital crowdfunding or some sort of system where you're grabbing equity and you're grabbing debt, and you're being able to now finance these projects. And then whoever builds this is maybe there's an API for permits, right? And you are simultaneously applying for permits across 80 different locales. And whoever gets their permit through the building department first basically wins the race, and they will, allocate that capital into that community and build those structures. That could be probably built, I would say in 5 to 6 years, that could be built by one person, one computer scientist who knows, real estate. I think that's what's so exciting about this moment is the power that we're going to put in individuals' hands is going to be immense. And these large teams and all of this cross communication between architects, engineers, and planners and things, that's going to be an API endpoint. I think that's, I think for some people that's alarming, and for someone like myself who's kind of knee deep in it, and that's really, really exciting future. I think we'll all, mutually benefit from that.
It's interesting. The things that you were bringing up made me think of two things. The first one, actually, you mentioned in kind of our collaborative note, which was when clients work, or let's say developers or whoever work with companies who are doing these things at the speed and agility that they're never going to want to use something else. Right? Once they see it, they're never going to unsee it. It's kind of, you drew the analogy of Amazon. Once I see what I can get my hands on and how fast I can get my hands on it, why would I want to do something differently? And differently is the existing, establishment of the profession of the building industry. It's like this, to design and build this building takes 36 months, 60 months, whatever the number is. It's a huge, immense, painful process for a lot of people to even consider going through.
Yeah, absolutely.
Therefore, they don't, right? So that was one thing I thought of, and I think it might be worth diving a little bit into that just to see what some of your experiences with that on the renovation side.
Yeah, I mean, just to take a step back to get into a little bit more of a personal narrative. I got my Bachelor's of Architecture at Cornell, and did the whole 5-year charade. And during that process, especially in the earlier half, there was no question I'm going to graduate. I'm going to join an architecture firm. I'm going to put my hours in. I'm going to take the AREs. I'm going to do yada yada. I did none of that. Right. I completely just abandoned it by graduation. And, when you're in your younger years of architecture, you have your friends and colleagues, obviously in your year, and then you also have acquaintances in other years. And when you get higher up in those years, you go to fourth year, you get to fifth year, you have friends who have graduated, and they're starting to chirp back about what life is like as a young architect.
Right.
And they're like, so I'm cutting foam models at 4 a.m. and I think I'm getting, some sort of, lung disease from it. And I get paid $30, an hour, and I'm trying to live in New York and I can't afford it. And, maybe I can make partner in 50 years.
Right.
And I'm like,
right.
just kind of doing the, I'm like, oh, this sucks.
Yeah.
And then meanwhile, I'm really getting into technology, and I'm starting to, in kind of remote Ithaca, New York, which is like nowhere near a hotbed of technology. You start to read TechCrunch. You start to kind of get the missives, of what's happening in San Francisco. I felt like a million miles away from where it's happening. And you start to see like this 22-year-old just raised $3 million on his, like, I'm like, what? Like, what is happening? Why are these young, ambitious people getting all the opportunities and being able to build something amazing? And when, from what I'm hearing through like the architecture firm, is if someone acted like that, someone's like, oh, we're going to transform this, and we're going to break this, and we're going to do something radical here, they would be very quickly, shown the door, right? In that type of more stodgy type of firm life. So, like, there's a lot of this kind of pay your dues mentality. Yeah. And I think as an arrogant young man, I was just like, nah, I don't want to pay my dues. And I just want to kind of skip that part. I pay my dues in a different way. I had to learn how to, build a career in technology. I didn't go out and found a company as soon as I arrived in San Francisco. This is kind of starting for me, 8-9 years later. But I think that just seeing that industry just really, really unequipped and not ready for radical change was something that was, very, very personal and really guided my decision making there, because I was like, well, I basically have this fork in the road, right? Where I can either say, gosh, parametric design is really nifty, but let me tell you, they're doing it wrong. They should be, building scripts and running them against 1,000 buildings, not building this crazy this one facade. Mm-hmm. And what I can do, I can go in there and I can change the profession, or I can just take a leap of faith, just go into the tech industry, not knowing what I was doing, and maybe one day I can, finagle my way back to some sort of semblance and connection with architecture. And I'm very thankful I chose door number 2. And I think there's a lot of people right now, my age, younger, and even older, who are like, yeah, maybe door 2 is not so crazy.
So talk about that journey that you went on from that point. I mean, you were still kind of tied to the profession of architecture and technology kind of together, as I understand it.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was scary. I basically flew out to San Francisco with no job and was sleeping on a buddy's couch until I somehow found some sort of product design job. I thought that was the best way for me to nudge my way into the industry, which was to, lean on the aesthetic skills that I've been building during architecture school, and went to a kind of a temp agency and said, I want to be a designer in tech. And, this is 2012 in tech, and people were hungry for talented young people who could like do something. And again, it was less about what your hard skills were, and it was more about just like, what's your attitude? Can you learn quickly? Can you move fast? And I found my way into a product design role. And then the second job I got was really the thing that propelled my career, which was joining Xamarin. And again, Xamarin has nothing to do with architecture. It was a cross-platform mobile development platform for C#.NET developers, so developers who develop for Microsoft. But I learned so much there because I grew from a designer there to a product manager there. Then we were eventually acquired by Microsoft. But what was important was just the velocity of your career there, right? So I went from just kind of like extremely average designer. I'm not that much better today, but like I've improved a little bit. And within a year of like entering that company, I was then PMing my own SaaS product with 12 engineers working with me. And so that sort of velocity, I think, was just intoxicating. And the advice I always give everyone, especially coming from architecture, is like, don't try to join an AEC Tech startup. Don't do that. Join a rocket ship and learn the ropes of joining a rocket ship, because that's what's going to teach you. And that's what's going to get your career going, because of the connections you make afterwards, and the people, the connections you'll build there, and the amazing things that those people and those individuals who worked at that rocket ship will eventually end up doing. It's been really true. And so Xamarin was really the most important journey in terms of that young career that I took after taking that leap.
And then you did exactly what you're talking about. You joined the rocket ship, and where did that take you from there?
Yeah, well, I think it took a little detour. That was at Katera. And so I'm sure a lot of your listeners are very familiar with Katera. One of the things that I think was really important in my time at Katera, which was extremely brief, it was 3 months. I kind of knew as soon as I walked in the door of the front door, like, oh, everyone here is full of shit. But what it really knocked out of me was this kind of, which I think is endemic in AEC Tech, which is this shiny object syndrome, where it's just like, hey, here's a technology, let's find a problem for it. And I think prefab and so many other kind of technologies that are kind of used and abused in our space, it's really unfortunate. And so I think, again, Katera was like, this sounds, Katera and prefab at that scale, it's something where it works really well on a Fast Company article, right? But it does not work in the Excel model. It does not generate the revenue you need it to do in order to get those economies of scale. And otherwise, and I've seen this with a number of different, AEC Tech startups, where it's just like, we're going all in on VR, we're going all in on AR, we're going all in on LiDAR or Bitcoin or blockchain or like all this stuff. It's like, who cares? What are you doing for the customer that's transformative? Figure that out and then work backwards to the technology. And I think that's where I learned at Katera, which was, don't lock yourself in to some sort of platform that you think will take you to the moon, right? Like, figure out the customer pain point and then work backwards to the technology that's going to get you there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's a great way to put it. And I think a lot of architects still, even in the traditional sense, struggle with the value proposition of architecture, which is exactly what you're talking about. And then figuring out how to get to that, or to bolster the parts of their business that help them do that even better. But I think there are so many shiny object distractions along the way. It's like, well, these are the keywords that are showing up in SEO. These are the ones that we want people to land on our website and make sure that they see something on our site that mentions AR and VR and all of these different things, rather than focusing on what their clients actually want. I have a hard time believing that their clients are going to hire an architect because they use VR. Right? That's
Absolutely.
it's just a means along the way. It's not why they're coming to you. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, you hit it right on the head. But I think it's going to take a couple more iterations of these, let's call them failures, right? To kind of get people into believing that, you really do need to start with the customer and then work backwards. We'll get there. But I think it would be prudent for everyone out there to really take that to heart, right? Like, don't get caught up in the noise. Don't get caught up in, whatever the technology du jour is, like, you're not going to, let's think about the fundamental problems here. What's hard right now? Material procurement is hard. Labor procurement is hard.
Yeah.
Getting permits is hard. Mm-hmm. All these different things, right? They have nothing to do, like, you're not going to solve any of those things with the blockchain. You're not, but you do need to build the really tough, and there's such immense opportunity here to build the picks and shovels businesses that do solve these things. Mm-hmm. They're not as pretty, they're not as flashy, but man, they incredibly valuable.
Yeah, and those are kind of foundational pieces of this platform puzzle that we're talking about.
You can't build applications on top if you don't have the platforms beneath them, right?
Yeah. So Upcodes, right? They're building an entire platform around codes and accessibility and model checks, but it's all in service of the building code. It's not a sexy subject at all. Nobody wants to deal with it. If you made a list of the unsexy subjects of working in the architectural profession, the list is pretty long, right? We're talking about codes. We're talking about specifications. We're talking about permit process. We're talking about agency review. We're talking about bin time. Like all of these things.
Right? That's where, like, where are people spending their most of their time? It's on that kind of nomenclature. And so, yeah, we need 1,000 upcodes, right? We need more of these platforms to come through. I keep egging on the Reynolds brothers to build the permit API. I don't think they're doing it though.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's like you think about how much inefficiency is in that whole process, and how those actually are the jobs that can be automated. Those kinds of things actually can be automated and should be automated first,
Right.
because it's fundamental to all of the work within the industry. It happens on top of that.
It's back to like, why are we spending time working on these pedantic tasks that really aren't really benefiting you in terms of you differentiating yourself from your competitors and also making something really fabulous for your customers? The more that you can, commoditize those units and outsource those units either to software or any other platform, maybe human in the loop, is better, because then you can really focus on the customer experience, which is the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
But so often, and if you look at the firm structure today, I think you could see that, like, because they can't outsource, because everything has to be, all this, talent has to be in-house and it's all very locked together, the attention paid to the customer experience is diminished. There is a certain amount of like zero sumness when it comes to time. And I think that's why you see why software platforms and software experiences are so addictive. It has nothing to do with the technology. It's just the fact that the people building those things have the luxury of thinking about that customer experience and making it wonderful. Mm-hmm. Not making it a 3.5-star experience, not making it a 4-star experience, making it a 10-star experience. Mm-hmm. But you can only do that if you can do away with all the different aspects that you just mentioned and allow someone else to do that, right? Yeah. But if you're doing everything and you're constantly doing that, you'll never be able to focus on that customer experience.
Yeah, and just thinking about whoever does do that and the experience that those customers are going to have, going back to our earlier comment about nobody's going to want to do anything different after they see that happen. So you want to be early to that as possible, because if you're not, your customers are going to go elsewhere, period, because they're going to not be able to unsee that.
Yeah, completely. And I think the app layer, when it comes to customers, is going to really be focused on having the customer as really being a first party, right? Mm-hmm. I think that there's a lot of, and again, I can't speak to it to a great extent because I really never practiced, but I'm assuming, clients are interfacing not just with architects, but they are interfacing with contractors, and they are interfacing with all these different parties. And take the equivalence of that with software. That means, like, if you had to interact with Facebook, but you also had to interact with, like, I don't know, their database provider, right? Like, I'm making a very weak analogy here, but when it's just kind of this really cohesive experience and it's a button, that just makes it, it's just like, you won't go back to it, right?
Yeah.
All the different craziness and all the different decision-making, you won't want to go back to that. It's just like, oh yeah, is there an easy button for this? Yeah. Then, like, you want to click it.
It makes me think of like Tesla's car configurator online, right? It was
absolutely
very early to the game of, like, we're not going to have dealerships. We're going to direct to consumer, and you don't have to wander a dealer and haggle with the salesperson and know more than they do, right? Which is so infuriating because that always happens. They're like, no, we'll just give you the interface to pick exactly what you want and push the buy button.
Right. I think this is one of the things that I think is deeply ingrained in architecture circles, is that every customer wants something custom. We have to cater to their every material choice, to their every, and it makes sense, right? Because when you're geographically constrained and you only have a certain amount of customers, then that makes sense. You have to bend to their whims. And I'm sitting in this architecture office now, and I have tile samples right here, right? And you show them off to your customer, and you have and there's like 1,800 of them over here, and right. Like, well, do you want this, kind of like taupe color? But when you start to expand your audience and you're starting to allow yourself through the internet and through these, by building these apps, when you're able to address a much, much larger audience, if 98% of people don't like your design and you're saying your design is set, right? And that's how we approach it at Outfit, right? Like, these are kits and the design is set. And in the future, we will offer variants. We will offer your ability to be able to, toggle things. but you're not getting something bespoke here. And I think that what we're seeing is that, people are okay with that. They want some of those decisions made for them, right? And I think there's this tension still in architecture. And again, I think it is because their geographically constrained customer set is they don't have that luxury to say, you know what, I'm not going to work with you, right? Because you have all these crazy needs of all these different requirements that make my life difficult as an architect. But I think once you can say, like, we're going to address a nationwide audience, and this is the design, just like you said with the Tesla configurator. If you don't like this color red for your electric car, cool. There's no other electric car in town, so you can go kick rocks.
Let's take a break from this conversation and welcome back the sponsor for this episode, ArcIT. Let's start this off with a short story. When Zach, a principal architect at CSDA Design Group, came to ArcIT, his network was hit with a ransomware attack and had been down for going on 7 days, and his current IT support provider was telling him that it should be back up any day now without making any progress on getting them back up and running. When he came to ArcIT for help, they worked to recover his firm's most important project files first so he could be back up and running because they understood there are deadlines to hit. Zach's firm has now been with ArcIT for going on a year, and he couldn't be happier. So, as business owners and architects, how often do we think about our IT provider? Typically, only when things go wrong. And for many of us, unfortunately, this happens too often, especially with the latest emphasis on remote work. I know that I've had to deal with my fair share of IT fire drills. Not pleasant. ArcIT, however, is a very different kind of company. They specialize in serving architecture, design, and engineering firms, and their goal is to help you use technology as a competitive advantage. This means that they understand your technology stack, and they won't waste your time and money learning how your tools work within your process. Combine that with industry-leading response times, proactive remote hardware management, and solid disaster recovery and backup solutions. That's something that everybody should be thinking of, honestly, and enterprise-grade security management. And yet, above all, these are just table stakes for a solid IT company. ArcIT goes a step further. They become your strategic partner when it comes to planning, budgeting, and integrating new technology into your business processes. So all of this sounds expensive, right? Nope, because ArcIT is highly specialized for our industry. Their pricing is on par, or in some cases even lower than other IT providers. ArcIT is transparent and even publishes the pricing right on their website. Speaking of their website, there's also something else you should check out when you're there, and that is their Design Under Influence blog and video series. Again, adding value to IT-type solutions across industry, all good stuff. So your business deserves a competent, responsive, and proactive IT partner. Reach out to my friends at ArcIT for a free consultation. So go to getarchit, that's getarchit.com, arc like architecture in the middle, and click Work With Us. So thanks very much to ArcIT for sponsoring this episode of the Troxel Podcast. And now let's get back to our conversation. I remember when I started working in a firm when I was in college interning, and the internet was still very new, okay? So I built their first website, and I hand-coded every single bit of it. And so I learned HTML. It was not daunting. It wasn't hard. I mean, it was just something that nobody else wanted to do, right? So yeah, I chose to do it and learn it. And what's interesting now is, look how far we've come in, let's just call it 25 years. 25 years, nobody even considers writing their own code for a website anymore. There are platforms out there, call it WordPress, Squarespace, Wix, it doesn't matter what it is, but people are they're not starting from scratch, and then they're plugging in modules to that are already defined because somebody's already figured it out. So you want to do payments, you plug in Stripe, et cetera, et cetera. There's all kinds of database plugins, and there's just tons and tons of stuff available. And look how much our profession has changed in the same amount of time. A negligible amount, I would say, into how people practice. So, I mean, you had a comment when we first started talking about doing a podcast, right? And that was, you said, e-commerce is going to hit traditional architecture hard. Once they catch on, it's going to be way too late. And this has been figured out a while ago. And things are moving so fast. So expand on that idea. And
if I had if there's any architects listening, I would say if you're in your 50s and your 60s, you have nothing to worry about, right? You're gonna be able to coast for the rest of your career. You're not gonna have to like learn any of this stuff. This will not be consequential for you, right? It's like,
okay, but let me stop you right there, because that is sad. That is so sad, because what we're intentionally saying is, and I agree with you, that is an outlook that many people have, and I wish we would think about the next 2 or 3 generations.
well, okay, well, I was getting there, right? Like,
okay.
like you don't have to worry about the internet if you were working in some industry that was going to be transformed by it in 1994, right? You're like, if you're 45, if you're 55, you're like 10 years, 15 years from retirement. It's probably going to like be a little uncomfortable at the very end of your career, but you don't have to like you don't have to relearn anything, right?
Reinvent yourself. Yeah.
You don't have to reinvent, which it gets harder as you get older. But if you're in your 20s and your 30s, I would start waking up, right? Because this is going to hit everyone like a freight train. And I'm not saying it's going to be, Outfit's going to do it and, you're all screwed. No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that in 20 years, it's going to look real different. And if you don't think people are going to want to purchase their homes and their renovations and their office spaces and whatever it may be, whatever built object they want online in a configurator and just press a button and there's financing built in. If you don't think that's going to happen, wake up, right? Don't be a travel agent in the world of Expedias. And so I would, I'm not saying freak out. I'm just saying like, start being more curious about what's happening here, right? Start digging in and seeing like, well, what are the tectonic plates and how are they moving? And what skills should I maybe start investing in to, transition to this newer future? I just think it would be incumbent for everyone in kind of that age range, my age range, to, start to at least, I'm not saying like, throw your hands in the air, quit architecture. I'm not saying that at all, but start being curious about what's happening in this industry at the moment, especially on the technology side, and embrace it and start to learn more about it. Because I think the more hands on deck, the better, like I would love more architects to kind of get more involved. I think that the more hands on deck would be beautiful. Don't stick your head in the sand and thinking, you can just avoid this for the next 40 years, because you won't be able to.
It is interesting to think about that potential that exists and how you can take all of this stuff that seemingly is tangential to our profession and applying it directly to it. There's so much potential there. I even think about, I'm starting to get into NFTs like the rest of the world and crypto. And I was recently listening to a podcast about DAOs. Are you familiar with DAOs? Decentralized Autonomous Organizations.
I'm sort of familiar, yeah.
So cryptocurrency is decentralized, right? That's one of the biggest benefits of it. Is there's not one entity controlling it, and so this is an idea of basically spooling up an organization, not a company per se. Like typical companies are built on this legacy idea of how companies are built, just like architecture firms are built on the legacy idea of how architecture firms are built. Well, now, because of this decentralized nature that the internet has enabled, it allows you to kind of spool up a community-led, and that community could be one person or it could be 100 people, right? It's not enormous right now, at least, to make the decisions about the directions that these things go. And the underlying kind of structure here is this idea of smart contracts. The contracts are built into this system, and because they're decentralized, they're easy to validate. This, to me, has huge potential in the type of things that we're talking about even right now. It's like putting together a puzzle for a project, and that can be a community-led, not top-down. It can be a community decisions along the way, and also a community ownership of that thing. And it's basically turning a company into a project.
So I'm going to push back here.
Yeah, do it.
Because this is kind of what I'm talking about when I say the shiny object syndrome. Right? Like DAOs
I think it is now. Like this is definitely on the early stage of that hype cycle curve.
Right. Like to go back to the thing that I was qualifying before, which is like, when does the technology matter? How is the DAO improving the customer experience? If me and you are starting the same company, right? And I'm, building, I'm getting incorporated in Delaware and I'm raising traditional venture capital and you're raising a DAO. Like, do you have a 10x advantage over me? I don't think so, because like unless you're making the product and you're making the customer experience 10x, like don't leverage the technology. Like you can, again, it doesn't have to, you can always leverage that in the future if that's convenient for your business model. But again, you got to come back to how is the customer making a purchase decision?
I think, and I'm not thinking of it from the end. I'm thinking of it as the involvement or the interactions leading up to, that end point, which is it gives more people more opportunity to be part of that decision-making process. Whereas like right now, a traditional corporation is very much the sharp point of the pyramid at the top.
Yeah, of course it is, right? But I'm just like, I'm just very shrewd when it comes to this stuff because I'm just like, well, at the end of the day, it really matters who the customer is choosing. And, you can have this like fabulous kind of organization and it's like very democratized. And like, listen, I sympathize with like how that is important and how that is going to be, that's fair and equitable. But like when you look at it in the battlefield of capitalism, will that win? Will you beat out other competitors who are doing something asymmetrical to that? And
yeah, it's early. It's too early to tell for sure.
Right? Yeah. And like I don't have the answer. I'm not saying I have the answer, but I've always been very reticent to jump on the technology train. Like this is the future. So it's like, well, like I'm just focused on making the 10-star customer experience, and everything works backwards from there.
Yeah, and I guess I'm thinking of it on a different perspective, which is like in the same way that Outfit has become enabled by the internet to build an app layer on top of platform layers, AWS, whatever those things are, Hyper, everything. To me, this is a very similar idea that has the potential. It might not be the answer in the future. It could totally fail, but we will learn something along the way. And this type of idea, I think, has the potential to disrupt the profession, the backbone of our profession, which is how we do business.
Well, at the end of the day, right, it really comes back to capital and how is capital getting allocated to projects, right? Why are architects have such thin margins, right? It's because they have zero risk capital in their projects, right? And I get it, like the whole dynamic of how developers work and all that stuff, like it is unfortunate, but this is kind of like how the table stakes are now. Developers get all the upside of a project because they have the capital, right? Because they put the risk in to say, we're going to build this structure on this lot in this city for these potential customers, right? And, that like all the rewards come from the risk capital. And so in this DAO, right, we would have to see like, well, where's the capital coming from for this, right? And so what is getting injected in there? And what do these LPs, right? Whoever is putting this money in, it's not charity, right? So what is their return on investment? Right. So if you can prove that the capital is going to be better allocated through some sort of DAO and you're going to get a much higher ROI, then of course that will win. But I guess like that's where I'm coming from, which is like, where is the capital going to be leveraged most efficiently, right?
Kind of like angel investing, right? It's like you've got these investors who diversify their portfolio, and most of them are losers, right? But there are some winners in there, hopefully. Yeah.
No, absolutely, right. And this is the case too. This is something where we're I think I speak with a lot of I can probably share this experience with a lot of other AEC Tech founders, especially ones who are trying to enter the space of marshaling atoms versus just moving bits around. Is that, there's a lot of folks who are like, is my capital going to be efficiently allocated by trying to transform the built world? Or what if there's just like an app that architects can use and, it's kind of like this isolated environment. You don't have to deal with the real world. Like that seems like a more sure bet. Yeah, I think that's kind of like the narrative right now inside of fundraising when it comes to this space is like, can you prove that these very, very new application layer objects are going to be far more, they're going to actually be far more capital efficient and more ROI for these angel investors. Again, it comes back to, people want returns, right? At the end of the day, people want returns, whether it's investors investing in a DAO or investors investing in angel investment. And so, that's always the framework I try to use is like, well, when the cows get called home, right? Like what are the, how much we're able to produce with that initial investment.
Bringing it back to Outfit and you guys, the kind of work that you've chosen to do, and we'll wrap up. I think this will be our last topic here. And I think it's incredible that you guys have focused on elevating the quality of life that's your goal, right? Is to give people some agency in the spaces they're already in to elevate their quality of life with these kits. Like that's how you describe it, right? It's a kit to enhance a kitchen. What are the different types of spaces that you guys support?
So kitchens, bathrooms, we're kind of listening to customers and kind of figuring out, what are the spaces that are most important to them and what are the ones that they feel personally capable of from a handiness perspective to actually improve. And, that's incumbent on us to make the material selection and the instruction set to be able to be accessible. I think we're still learning that right now, which is like, what is that bright line? What is the tool that is too aggressive in terms of advanced experience that, is just not going to be something that is broadly applicable. We want to be the Home Depot of the 21st century, right? And so we need to make sure that it's super accessible to all. And so I think for me personally, right, I had this, really valuable skill of being brought up, and I'm a second generation architect, and I was raised to be very handy, and I think it's just incredible that I have the opportunity now to pass on that skill set to as many people as possible, especially being able to leverage software and leverage the internet. As you said, like people should have the confidence and the ability to tackle problems with their home, and not having to outsource every single thing. Now, obviously, there are certain things that we don't want to necessarily get into, right? Like we don't want to move structural walls and things of that nature. We definitely think you should work with an architect for those type of modifications. But for things that some lipstick on a pig type of projects that you can do in your space, whether it be that bathroom or that kitchen or that living room, we want to be able to provide a kit of materials, tools, and instructions that allow you to make your space more enjoyable. We think that DIY can be a fun and a bonding experience for everyone, whether that be your partner, you working with your kids, you working with your neighbors, and so that's what we're trying to do with Outfit.
There's also that injection of sweat equity that they get, which probably elevates that outcome and amplifies it to another level, right? When you're like point at something and say, "I made that," that has a huge effect in the outcome and the stories that live on beyond that project.
There's this great study that was it's called the IKEA effect, that people are willing to pay up to 60% more for something that they assembled themselves because of the pride they got from actually assembling. So if you sold a bookcase that was already put together and already finished versus a bookcase that is cheaper to produce because you're not assembling it yourself and you're not shipping the full put together item, right? You're flat packing it. You can sell that for more because of the reward of people get from putting things together. I can speak for myself, like as a kid who's just like obsessed with Legos and things of that nature, like, you kind of graduate right to that next level. So you go from Legos to your dorm room, right, where you're putting together that bookshelf or that desk. And we really see Outfit as that next step where we're moving from that bookstep to that bookshelf to really, being the interfacing with your actual home and improving the surfaces and the structures of your home. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting observation.
And how are you guys delivering your instruction sets?
So everything is in an app, right? So we've already built this app which allows people to, scroll through all the different, we have different sections, such as tiling and demolition, and how to do tiling, all these different sets of instructions that we can actually, because of the nature of the app, we can, and on the nature of their existing conditions, we can add and subtract those instructions, which are generalized. But once we add and subtract those instructions for their specific project, then they get this kind of unique instruction set, almost like this kind of unique IKEA booklet for their unique project. And I think that's what's so powerful about what we're building is the ability to be flexible, right? Because every space is is different in its own way. And I think that there's a lot of work to be done in terms of kind of categorizing and commoditizing all the different brownfield conditions out there. I like to say that it's a long tail, but it's not infinite, right? There are things that rhyme out there. Like if you're in a renovation that was done in the 80s, like and you tear down the, say the wall, we expect certain things behind that wall, right? There's a certain amount of like variance, right? And a certain amount of expected things that we can expect from that era. That is what you can expect from that house. And so, everything is just like in your pocket. And that's what we think is so powerful. You get in your pocket, you get all the different orders coming in. You can see the tracking numbers of theirs. You get all the different to-dos. You can chat with one of our experts. And so, it's just like a really powerful and fun experience and just a new way to DIY.
And are you guys delivering any video-based content about how to use certain things? I'm just trying to imagine like the tool set that you're going to ship to these people to do the thing. And then the experience level, like that's another whole set of unknowns for you guys. It's like, what's their experience level?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think we're at a point now where we're not producing first-party videos, but it's something we're definitely excited to start doing within this year, where we can really kind of, right now we're looking at what are best practices online, and we're trying to collate them and edit them and kind of being it's editor, if you will, and looking at what are the different DIY tips out there and which ones can we learn from, and like, oh, that's actually really a bad idea. And everyone on the team has an architecture degree, and so it's really nice to be able to kind of like go back and forth and really have that expertise there of different experiences, different opinions about how things should be done, and then giving the customer a really high quality result because of that architectural collaboration. I think that video is going to be huge for us long term, and it's just a matter of like getting that content machine rolling.
I love it, and so I'm really glad that you're able to share this on the show with people. I personally like how you guys are doing something to elevate the day-to-day of people's living situations. Obviously, there's a huge change that people have gone through, and I think the crowds at Home Depot on the weekend are a definite indicator that there's a ton of attention being put onto our own personal spaces, unlike previously. So kudos to you guys for doing that and for being kind of at the ready for this huge change. Like, it's just fantastic timing for you guys. I bet you're learning a ton right now as well.
Yeah, it's a very rapid learning process right now.
Well, if you want to finish up and give everybody links to where they can find out more about Outfit and what you guys are doing online and your Twitter accounts, and then what I'll do is I'll put all those links in the show notes so that people can follow along.
Absolutely. So we're just Build Outfit everywhere, buildoutfit.com, Build Outfit on Instagram, Build Outfit on Twitter, if you want to follow us. So and we are releasing kits, and we're trying to release kits to the greater cadence right now. We're in the middle of launching this great kitchen kit, which is kind of like this all-encompassing modern farmhouse. Includes, the cabinets, the countertops, the floors, and we'll be releasing more projects that are a little less intense than the kitchen in the coming weeks and the coming months. And so, please give us a shout out and give us a follow. And you can always reach me at ian@buildoutfit.com.
Thanks, Ian. I really appreciate it. And again, thank you so much for the conversation today. It was a lot of fun and great information shared. So I'm looking forward to the next one.
Well, I really, really enjoyed it, Evan. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Troxel Podcast. And once again, I would like to thank Arc IT for sponsoring this episode. Visit their website at getarchit, that's getarchit.com. This show is part of the Gable Media Podcast Network. You can see all the shows at gablemedia.com. That's GABLMEDIA.com. You can help support what I'm doing here by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts to help get the word out, and of course, share it with your friends. I'd love to hear from you, so leave a comment on the website at trxl.co/podcast, where you can find every episode. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube. Just search for eTroxel. Talk to you soon.